You wake up one morning and realize the woman you married isn't who you thought she was, not because she changed, but because the mask finally slipped. And here's what terrifies most men. You might have years left in this unless you understand what you're truly dealing with. What I'm about to share with you isn't comfortable. It's not easy to hear. But if you're feeling perpetually confused, consistently inadequate, or wondering why nothing you do is ever quite enough, this might be the most important conversation you'll have this year. This isn't about blaming anyone. It's about understanding the psychological architecture of narcissistic behavior so you can reclaim your clarity, your strength, and most importantly, your sense of self. Because here's the brutal truth. You can't fix what you don't understand, and you can't protect yourself from what you refuse to see. By the end of this video, you'll understand 3 critical patterns that keep men trapped, and more importantly, what you can actually do about it. Let's begin. In a relationship with a narcissistic woman, your biggest enemy isn't anger. It's confusion. You start questioning your own memory, your own perceptions, your own sanity. You'll say something happened last Tuesday, and she'll look at you with genuine bewilderment, as if you've invented the entire scenario. This isn't forgetfulness. It's a fundamental inability or unwillingness to maintain a consistent narrative that doesn't serve her immediate emotional needs. And you need to understand something crucial here. You're not imagining this. You're not being overly sensitive. You're experiencing a genuine psychological phenomenon that has been documented and studied for decades. You'll spend enormous psychological energy trying to establish basic shared reality. Think about that for a moment. Most couples argue about money or parenting or whose turn it is to do the dishes. You're arguing about whether a conversation even occurred. That's not a relationship. That's a courtroom without a judge, where the rules change every day and you're always somehow in violation of laws that were never written down. Here's what happens in your mind, and I want you to pay close attention because this is where many men lose themselves. You think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe if I just tried harder to understand her perspective, if I just communicated better, if I just loved her more skillfully, everything would be fine. This is precisely the point where your own decency becomes the trap. The Stoics understood something profound about this. Marcus Aurelius wrote about having power over your mind, not outside events. He understood that external chaos can't truly harm you unless you internalize it, unless you let it corrupt your understanding of yourself. But when the chaos is coming from inside your home, from the person who's supposed to be your partner, your ally, your safe place, that's a different battle entirely. That's not external chaos. That's intimate warfare. And here's what makes it so insidious. She's not consistently terrible. That's the trap, you see. If she were horrible all the time, you'd leave. You'd pack your bags and go. Instead, there are moments of genuine warmth, connection, even love. These moments aren't necessarily manipulation in the conscious sense. They might be windows into her own fragmented self, moments when the defenses come down and something real emerges. But they create a pattern, and this pattern is crucial to understand. You stay for the highs, enduring increasingly devastating lows. This is what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. Your brain releases dopamine not when you win consistently, but when you win unpredictably. So you keep pulling that lever, hoping this time will be like that beautiful moment you had 3 weeks ago, that conversation where she really saw you, that evening where everything felt right. Now, your very strength becomes your weakness, and this is something I see destroying good men over and over again. You're trying to understand her, to see her pain, to give her the benefit of the doubt. That's admirable. That's what good men do. That's what healthy relationships require. Empathy, patience, the willingness to see beyond the immediate conflict to the person underneath. But here's what you must understand. Narcissistic personalities don't experience empathy the way you do. They may understand it intellectually. They may be able to perform it when necessary. But they experience it fundamentally as a tool, a lever, a means to an end. Your empathy is an opening. Your patience is an opportunity. Your forgiveness is permission to transgress again. And so you find yourself calculating every word before you speak, monitoring her mood before you enter a room. adjusting your entire emotional atmosphere to accommodate her instability. You become a student of her moods, an expert in reading subtle signals, a master of preemptive damage control. And here's the cruelest part, the part that will make you question everything. No matter how carefully you calibrate your behavior, no matter how perfectly you perform, the explosion will come anyway. Because it was never about your behavior. It was about her internal state, which you can't control, which you were never meant to control, which nobody can control. So I want you to do something right now. I want you to think back to who you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, before this relationship consumed you. What did you care about? What made you laugh spontaneously without calculating whether it was safe to laugh? What were your ambitions, your dreams, the things you stayed up late thinking about? Now look at yourself today. If those things have dimmed, disappeared, or been systematically dismantled, that's not normal relationship compromise. That's not the natural evolution of a maturing partnership. That's identity erosion, and you need to recognize it for what it is. Because narcissistic individuals are masters of what I call shame installation, not guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Guilt is actually healthy. Guilt motivates change, but shame says, I am bad. Shame attacks your fundamental worth as a human being. She won't say, that hurt my feelings. She'll say, what kind of person does something like that? See the difference? One addresses a specific behavior that can be modified. One attacks your core identity, suggesting that something is fundamentally wrong with who you are at the deepest level. But here's what you need to understand, and I need you to really hear this. Your identity isn't gone. It's not lost forever in some irretrievable way. It's suppressed, buried, waiting. There's an ancient Stoic principle that applies perfectly here. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Your recognition of this pattern isn't your weakness. It's your first step back to yourself. The fact that you're watching this video, the fact that something in you is saying, this isn't right, this isn't normal, this isn't what I signed up for, that's not confusion. That's clarity trying to break through. The question isn't whether you've lost yourself. The question is, are you ready to do the hard work of finding yourself again? Now, let me tell you about 3 patterns that keep men trapped in these relationships. Because if you can recognize these patterns, you can start to break free from them. The first is what I call the rescue fantasy. Deep in your masculine psychology is an archetypal pattern, the rescuer. You see someone struggling, someone in pain, and you think, I can help. My love, my stability, my commitment will be enough to heal this. This isn't foolish. It's actually noble. It comes from the best part of who you are. But it's catastrophically misapplied in this situation. Narcissistic personality structure isn't a phase. It isn't a mood. It isn't something that love alone can transform. It's a deeply rooted psychological adaptation, usually formed in early childhood, calcified over decades of reinforcement. Your love is real. I don't question that for a moment. But her capacity to receive it in a healthy way, that's the question you need to ask yourself honestly. And so you cycle through endless if-only statements. If only I were more patient. If only I made more money. If only I were more attentive, more understanding, more present, more something. Each one promises that you're just one change away from breakthrough. But the target keeps moving, doesn't it? Today's solution becomes tomorrow's inadequacy. You can never quite reach the finish line because the finish line is being moved every time you get close to it. Then there's the sunk cost fallacy. And this one is particularly painful. You've invested years, maybe decades. You've built a life together, bought a home, perhaps raised children. The thought of that being wasted is agonizing. I understand that. The human mind rebels against the idea that all that effort, all that hope, all those years of trying were somehow for nothing. But here's what I need you to understand, and this is critical. Time already spent isn't a reason to spend more time suffering. That's not wisdom. That's not commitment. That's just fear masquerading as virtue. Would you tell your son to stay in misery because he's already been miserable for 5 years? Would you advise your best friend to remain in pain because he's already invested a decade? Then why? Why do you tell yourself that? The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Your reaction can include the courage to reassess. It can include the strength to say, I gave this everything I had, and it's still not working, and that's not a failure of character. That's a recognition of reality. The second pattern is what I call the children justification, and this is the most painful calculation men make. You think, my suffering is worth it if the children have an intact home. And I understand where this comes from. I truly do. You want to protect them. You want to give them stability. You want them to have what you perhaps didn't have. But children aren't blind. They're not benefiting from witnessing your gradual erasure. They're not learning healthy relationship patterns by watching this dynamic play out day after day. They're learning that this is what relationships look like, that this is what love means, that this is what marriage requires, the systematic diminishment of one person for the comfort of another. Your sons are learning to accept disrespect. Your daughters are learning to give it, or perhaps it's reversed. Either way, you're not protecting them. You're programming them. You're teaching them patterns they'll spend their 20s and 30s trying to unlearn in therapy. The greatest gift you can give your children isn't a marriage certificate on the wall or two adults living under the same roof in quiet desperation. It's a model of what self-respect looks like, even when it's difficult, even when it costs something, even when it means making hard decisions that nobody applauds. Sometimes two healthy separate homes provide more stability than one toxic unified home. This isn't about abandonment. This is about reconstruction. This is about showing your children that adults can make hard decisions with integrity, that boundaries matter, that personal dignity isn't negotiable. The third pattern is the fear of loneliness, and this one runs deep. There's a profound difference between being lonely and being alone, and most men don't understand this distinction until they've experienced both. You can be desperately lonely lying next to someone every night. In fact, that's one of the deepest forms of loneliness that exists. Invisible loneliness, the loneliness of being misunderstood by the one person who's supposed to understand you most. Conversely, you can be alone and at peace, aligned with yourself, building something meaningful, connected to purpose. Men historically have possessed enormous capacity for productive solitude. Think about the monks, the philosophers, the explorers, the builders. They understood that periods of aloneness aren't punishment. They're preparation. They're where you rebuild your relationship with yourself. They're where you remember who you are when you're not constantly managing someone else's emotional chaos. After years in chaos, silence feels threatening. Your nervous system has adapted to constant crisis. Your body expects the next explosion, the next accusation, the next unpredictable shift. But what if that silence isn't emptiness? What if it's space? Space to think clearly, space to feel your own feelings without immediately suppressing them, space to hear your own voice again, that voice you've been drowning out for years. So let me talk about the path forward, because I don't want to leave you in despair. I want to give you something concrete, something you can actually work with. Your first act of freedom is accepting what is actually happening, not what you wish were happening, not what she promises will happen next time, what is demonstrably, repeatedly, evidentially happening in your life right now. This isn't pessimism, this is clarity, and clarity is the foundation of all positive change. Byron Katie asks a powerful question. When you argue with reality, who wins? The answer is never you. Reality always wins. Your job isn't to change reality through wishful thinking or positive affirmations or trying harder to be understanding. Your job is to respond to reality with wisdom and strength. I want you to start keeping a private journal, not for evidence in some future legal proceeding, though it might serve that purpose, but for sanity, for maintaining your grip on what's real. Write down what was said, what happened, what you felt. When she later denies the conversation occurred, you'll have a reference point outside your own memory. This isn't paranoia. This is protection against psychological warfare. This is you maintaining your own psychological sovereignty. Once you can name what's happening, this is projection, this is gaslighting, this is emotional manipulation. It loses some of its power over you. Knowledge is defensive strength. You're not crazy. You're not inadequate. You're dealing with a complex psychological dynamic that has nothing to do with your worth as a human being. Now, let's talk about boundaries, because this is where most men fail spectacularly. A boundary isn't if you do X, I'll do Y to hurt you back. That's retaliation. A boundary is if you do X, I will do Y to protect myself. See the difference? One is about control. One is about self-preservation. You're not trying to change her behavior. You're deciding what behaviors you'll accept in your presence. But boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. This is where most men collapse. You state your boundary clearly. She violates it. You do nothing. Why? Because enforcing it feels mean. It feels harsh. It feels unloving. You tell yourself you're being compassionate, understanding, patient. But here's what you need to understand at the deepest level. Allowing someone to consistently violate your boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. It's participating in your own gradual diminishment. Real love, for yourself and ultimately even for her, requires that you mean what you say. When you enforce a boundary, you don't need to be angry. You don't need to explain endlessly. You don't need her approval or understanding or agreement. You simply state it and follow through. I won't continue conversations where I'm being insulted. I'm going for a walk. Then you go. Not in anger, not in drama, just in calm self-respect. This isn't stonewalling. This is self-respect in action. The Stoics had a concept they called voluntary discomfort, choosing the harder but healthier path because it aligns with your principles, because it's congruent with who you know yourself to be. Watch what happens when you start doing this. One of three things will occur. She'll adjust her behavior. This is rare, but it does happen sometimes when someone realizes the old patterns aren't working anymore. Or she'll escalate dramatically, testing whether you really mean it, pushing harder to see if your boundaries are real or just theater. Or you'll discover you're more capable of standing firm than you thought, and that discovery itself will change everything. All three outcomes provide information. All three clarify your path forward. All three are better than the passive acceptance you've been living with. Now let me talk about rebuilding your internal foundation, because this is crucial. You need to reconnect with purpose beyond the relationship. What did you used to care about before all your emotional energy went into managing this dynamic? What problems in the world concern you? What skills have you neglected? What books have you meant to read? What projects have you put off? Start there. Not as distraction, not as escape, but as reclamation. You are not just a husband. You are a man with purpose, with contributions to make, with a story that extends far beyond this relationship. You had an identity before this relationship. You can have one during it. You can certainly have one after it. Your body holds trauma. Your mind hasn't fully processed yet. Start moving it out. Lift weights, run, practice martial arts, take long walks. Not for aesthetics, not to look better, but for the felt sense of your own power. When your body remembers it's strong, your mind follows. There's something profound that happens when you physically push yourself, when you choose voluntary challenge, when you prove to yourself that you're more capable than you've been feeling. And you need people who see you clearly, not enablers who tell you everything's fine, not toxic positivity, but men who will tell you the truth with respect, a good therapist, a men's group, trusted friends who've maintained their own integrity through their own struggles. You've been isolated. That was part of the pattern, whether conscious or not. Break it. Reach out. You'll be surprised how many men understand exactly what you're going through. Seneca wrote something that applies perfectly here. He said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." All those catastrophic scenarios you're playing in your head about what will happen if you establish boundaries, if you reclaim yourself, if you make hard decisions, most of them won't come to pass. But he also wrote something else. "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Your trial isn't your end. It might be your beginning. This experience, as painful as it is teaching you things about yourself you never would have learned otherwise. It's revealing depths of strength you didn't know you possessed. It's clarifying what you will and won't accept in your life going forward. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. So where does this leave you? If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in these patterns, I want you to know something, and I want you to really hear me. You're not weak for having stayed. You're not foolish for having tried. You loved someone with everything you had. That's not your failure. That's your humanity. That's the best part of who you are, and don't let this experience corrupt that. But here's what happens next. You have a choice to make. Not today necessarily, not even this week, but soon. The choice between continued erosion and difficult reconstruction, between familiar suffering and unknown freedom, between staying small and remembering who you actually are. This isn't about whether she's bad or you're good. This isn't about villains and heroes. This is about whether the relationship as it currently exists allows both people to thrive. If the answer is no, if one person is consistently growing while the other is consistently shrinking, you have a responsibility to yourself, to your children if you have them, to the life you're meant to live, to do something different. Start small. You don't have to make massive changes tomorrow. Establish one boundary. Reconnect with one old friend. Spend 1 hour this week doing something that used to make you feel alive. These aren't escapes. These are reconnaissance missions into your own soul. These are you testing the waters of your own agency, your own power, your own right to exist as a whole person. If this resonated with you, if you're beginning to see patterns you've been unable to name, if something in you is saying, yes, this is what I've been experiencing, subscribe to PsycheLens. We're building something here, a community of men committed to psychological strength, emotional clarity, and living with integrity even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The path forward exists. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. It will require courage you're not sure you have, but you do have it. You've had it all along. You've just been using it to endure rather than to transform. The question is, are you ready to walk it?